Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody is well. We'll get going right now. It's just turned 6 o'clock. Some instructions on the screen. If you haven't done so already, can you please type your name, your organization, and your position into the conversation/meeting chat, just so we have a record of who is on the call. If you do have any questions or comments as we go through the agenda, please put them into the comment chat area, and we will try to address them as much as we can. We will be developing an FAQ document after this presentation. We do have some questions that were sent in, so we'll look to address those ones this evening. And then we will try to address as many as we can that gets put into the chat. So if you can mute your mics, we have some people who aren't muted. I'd appreciate that. And we'll just start off with Sean Hammond giving you some opening remarks.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Welcome. And I want to thank you all for being here to take in the, I guess you could say, the strategy for opening our game in Alberta. And hopefully we can get back to full soccer as soon as possible. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sean Lowther.
When you received an email from Claire, she did send the agenda and then a return to train document. So if you have those handy, that would be appreciated. The agenda is up on the screen. Got the remarks already from Sean. We'll just do some introductions, and then there'll be a bunch of presentations by Canada Soccer, Government of Alberta. We have a doctor who plays the game at a decent level, or used to. His daughter's a lot better than him, but he's not a bad player himself. So we will get him to give some feedback. We have a lawyer from Sport Law and Strategy Group, our insurance broker, and then we will go through the document fairly high level. We won't go into great detail, and then we'll answer with some comments and questions at the end, and we'll try to get as many as we possibly can. Like I said, there will be an FAQ put together that will be posted and sent to everybody that's on this call, and then hopefully we'll get adjourned. I'm hoping it won't be too long, but enough time that we can get enough information to everybody to help them with their getting back to play. So without further ado, the introductions. From the Government of Alberta, we have Marvin Dobish, who's our sport consultant for Alberta Soccer, and Stephen Patrick, who normally works with multi-sport games, but he is now working on return to play protocols with the Policy and Strategy Department of the government. From Canada Soccer, we have Earl Cochran. Not sure of his title. He doesn't seem to have any title, but he seems to do a lot of stuff for Canada Soccer. Jason DeVos, our Director of Soccer Development, will be on the call. In regards to the doctor on the call, Noel Grisdell, who played quite a few years for the Callies when they won national championships. And like I said, his daughter's a better player than him, but he will give us perspective from a medical side, as well as with that soccer background to help us all out. Stephen Indug from Sport Law and Strategy Group will certainly give us some information, and then Stephen Beeston from AON Insurance. Sean's just been on as the president of ASA, and I'm the executive director. So let's start off with Marvin Dobish and Stephen Patrick. If you can unmute your mics and your video, and off you go.
All right, thank you very much, Sean. Good evening, everybody. I trust that everybody's staying well during this time, and Stephen and I are pretty excited to be here with you this evening and share with you some of the information that came out of the announcement from yesterday about stage 2 of the relaunch and what it means to the overall sector. Just on behalf of the Sport, Physical Activity and Recreation branch of the Ministry of Culture, Multiculturalism, and the Status of Women, we'd like to thank Sean Lowther and Sean Hammond for the invitation to participate on this evening's webinar. We're looking forward to sharing some of the information from the recent announcements with all of you, and to be able to hopefully try to answer some of your questions. Before I pass it on to my colleague, Stephen Patrick, who will provide an overview of the guidance documents for stages 1 and 2, we'd like to acknowledge and thank all of the other presenters on the call this evening. Everybody's been working around the clock to ensure that we are putting together a really, super collaborative return to sport plan for the provincial soccer community, so that you and your athletes, coaches, officials, parents, and volunteers can return back to the pitch in a safe and healthy manner. So I'm now going to hand it off to my colleague, Stephen, who's been working closely on the return to play guidelines, and he'll share some information with you.
Thank you, Marvin, and thank you, Sean, and Sean and the ASA board. It is good to be here tonight. I'm hoping to provide some clarity around the Stage 2 relaunch and return to play guidelines. I'm also really pleased to be sharing the stage with two other Stevens that know how to spell their name. So first off, I just want to touch on the guidelines and how they're created. Alberta Health and Dr. Dina Hinshaw are creating and developing all policy with regards to the COVID-19 response. So everything is coming out of Alberta Health, and no decisions are being made without Dr. Hinshaw's crew kind of having the approval, being part of the approval process. Sport, physical activity, and recreation's role is to work with Alberta Health, providing consultation for sport and that sport context, making sure that the language is in sport language. And now that the guidelines have been announced, it's our role to ensure that our sports stakeholders, such as all of you on the call here, have the information and clarity you require to move forward. So what's on the screen right now, the first link there is a link to all of the guidance documents that have been created by Alberta Health. These are sector-specific guidelines, and the first ones that were created that had any relation to sport whatsoever were around golf courses and return to play on the golf course, as well as outdoor recreation, which was aimed more at just getting people out and active on an individual basis. And then there was some relevance, obviously, to the day camps guidance documents that were posted. With regards to the guidance documents that my team has been working on, the first one that was created was released on May 29th, and it was the guidance for organized outdoor sport, physical activity, and recreation. So the link is there as well. It can be found on the Alberta Biz Connect, that's BIZ Connect website. And what that unveiled on May 29th is that sport was allowed to continue providing that physical distancing was put in place. And training opportunities, that type of thing. And if you were a sport like tennis that could actually compete while staying distant, then you're okay to go ahead. That brings us to Stage 2 and what was announced yesterday by Premier Kinney and Dr. Hinshaw. And I apologize for the error on the screen. It does say guidance for indoor spar. That is how it is linked to the document within the BizConnect website.
Stephen, could you speak up, please? There's a few people can't hear you.
Yeah, my apologies. I'll throw my headphones on right away here. See if that helped. So Stage 2 guidance are indicated as indoor sport, physical activity, and recreation, but the document itself is titled Return to Sport, Physical Activity, and Recreation Stage 2. 95% of the information that soccer requires is in this guidance. It is certainly aimed at indoor sport in terms of the facility piece, because that was new to Stage 2. However, all of the updated information is indeed in this document. It does make some sense to continue to refer to that outdoor document because there is some information that wasn't kind of transferred over. Excuse me one second. Okay, sorry, I hope that's better. Let's take a look at the next slide, Sean. Okay, there we go. Sorry, can we take a look at the next slide? Okay, so the big thing that was announced yesterday with regards to return to sport is the introduction of cohorts or mini leagues. So basically what was announced is that all sport, all training, all programming, all practice, and all play may continue with the exception of large tournaments, large events and tournaments. If a sport is able to continue with physical distancing, then they can go that route. And that may be something that soccer would like to do with regards to their training regimen as well. However, the cohorts in mini leagues is the piece that most people are interested in. What this allows for, and this is a balance between the recognition that sport provides benefit to Albertans. However, the mitigation of allowing it free for all and allowing everybody to kind of go back to sport as we knew it prior to COVID-19. So this is a compromise of sorts. Groups of 50 people may train and play together within a cohort. Now, this would include all personnel, players, coaches, and officials that are not able to physically distance. Coaches may coach multiple cohorts only if they keep physical distancing in mind. Athletes are asked to participate in only one cohort at a time. And right now, the cohort duration would be through to the end of stage 2. If you were to look at changing that, mixing up your cohorts, mixing up that group of 50 people, you could do so if there was a 2-week quarantine between the formation of that next cohort. Alberta Health is asking that players physical distance, players and personnel within those cohorts, physical distance where possible when not playing. So even on the sidelines or in the training environment. What this allows for is allows for groups of people to play soccer as we know it, to have that physical interaction on the pitch, and yet it will mitigate the need for intervention, health intervention, if there's an outbreak. So it will kind of limit the spread of the outbreak. The next slide, please, Sean. Other considerations that you as soccer organizations will need to consider is the daily screening and participant tracking. So what we want with the daily screening is we want participants to be asked the questions as to whether or not they're having any symptoms, whether or not they've come into contact with anybody with COVID, et cetera. And that should be done on a session-by-session basis. Certainly, we want to encourage those that are feeling sick to stay home. Those that get sick during the event to go home immediately and to separate themselves. And certainly for those that are vulnerable to assess their own requirements and make their own decisions with regards to participation. If there is a need for participant tracking by Alberta Health, if one of the soccer members were to come down with COVID, they want to be able to figure out who that person may have come in contact with. And so right now they're asking for 2 weeks worth of records. And that participant tracking should be done at every session. With regards to shared equipment, in this case, mostly soccer balls, Dr. Hinshaw understands that in order for us to participate in sport, there does need to be a sharing of soccer balls. That ball needs to pass from participant to participant. And it is impossible for us during play, after a throw-in, for that ball to be disinfected, obviously. So what they're asking is for increased attempts and procedures in order to disinfect the soccer balls when possible. So I'm sure that the board will be working on procedures in terms of how many times a game, much like a football game where the balls go kind of in and out of play. The other thing to consider is who's doing that disinfecting. Is it somebody within the cohort or somebody outside of the cohort? So they must be keeping their distance and just making sure that they are, of course, being very careful with their own hygiene, etc. Other things, just catch on my slide here, sorry. Obviously, no shared personal items. So things like towels and water bottles, no bucket of oranges at halftime, that type of thing. Everything that participants bring should be their own, should be labeled, and should be kept separate from others. Obviously, frequent hand sanitation, especially again because there's throw-ins, there's goalies that keepers that are handling the ball with their gloves. Refrain from touching the face as much as possible. I know it's very difficult. I certainly a habit that I have of touching my face. I've got my hands crossed right now, so I don't do it while I'm on screen. And then with regards to spectators, the maximum of 100 applies to both indoor and outdoor at this time, as long as they can be physically distanced. Cheering and yelling is discouraged just because of the transmission of COVID is certainly increased in those manners. In indoors specifically, if we get to the indoor soccer season, they are encouraging spectators to wear masks. That's the Coles Notes version. I'm sure there'll be some questions after, and I'll be sticking around to help with that.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate that. Like I said, we'll take some questions at the end. Earl Cochran or Jason, are you able to unmute and do your presentation?
Yeah, Sean, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I think what we're planning on doing is just to walk through a high level of where we are and sort of how we got to this sort of place. For a very brief moment, walk through the assessment tool, which I think the vast majority of your members have in their hands, and in many respects have gone through that session. I'm going to turn it over to Jason for the back end of that, because at the back end of that is a significant discussion around some of the specific mitigation within the tool that would be of great assistance to your members. And I think there's a significant part of that mitigation that is very operational and very technical in nature. And I think Jason is going to walk through the age slide that we had provided to the members. And then at the back end, I'm going to talk a little bit about our response plan, the rationale behind that document, and a little bit about what it says and what it's meant for. So just the next slide, Sean. And before I dive into the risk assessment, I have to say that, it was Friday the 13th, March 13th, when we had suspended soccer, in-person, on-field, sanctioned soccer across the country. And since that time, I know that I have met with the executive directors of the provinces and territories well over 25 to 30 times. I know Jason has done the same with his technical committee, and I know that the President's Forum group has met a handful of times as well. So when you add all of that up, there's some significant work that has gone in, some significant heavy lifting by many. And I just want, while I have the opportunity, to thank both Sean's, Sean Hammond and Sean Lowther, for the work that they've put in with those two groups. As everyone knows, this is a very fluid situation, right? It is in many respects, a very regional and varied situation. The situation that occurs in Alberta, and I would even say within separate regions of Alberta, is very different from what's happening in Prince Edward Island, what's happening in the territories, what's happening in Ontario and Quebec. So we quickly realized that any return back to soccer was going to have to be regional in nature. There was just no way for us to throw a blanket over the country and try to flick a switch to come back on. And including with that, it was very difficult for us to create any sort of plan that spoke to the 13 different realities that were going on in the country. I think everyone on this call would agree that the federal government, the provincial governments, and in many respects the municipal governments have done an excellent job in educating their constituents. And one of the big educational pieces of that is to understand just how different every situation is in every region of the country. So having said all of that, what we thought was the best approach was for our provincial and territorial member associations to have a significant hand in creating their own return to play plans, and then find a way for us to get those plans out into their membership, and then have an ability for, as the clubs start to build their plans out, have the ability to assess those plans without being an approval process, but more of a self-assessment and a self-evaluation process because of the different situations that were going on in the country. So what we did is we created this risk assessment for the provinces to share with their members. And it's really broken out into 7 buckets, as you've probably seen as you've gone through it. And those are ultimately having a firm understanding of COVID-19, which I said off the top. I think the vast majority of you do, because of the good job that both the feds and the provincial governments have done in that education piece. And we're seeing this as the information comes back to us in the handful of provinces that have already gone through this risk assessment tool. I would say that the next 2 buckets are areas that we see there's probably a little bit of a gap. And so what we've done, and I'll jump the emergency response piece because I'm going to talk about it at the back end. But the emergency response piece, the stakeholder piece, and there's a communication piece in the next slide that I'll show you in a second, that are all interrelated. They really talk about the work that goes on behind the scenes in planning and understanding what happens in situations where you have either an illness or understanding how to prevent them, or understanding just who to put in place to guide your sort of COVID-19 communications as you move forward. I would say that the vast majority of the organizations that have gone through the tool already have a firm understanding of the governance. Do you have a board that has the decision-making power to react quite quickly to situations? Do you have the ability to get together on a quick basis, an emergency sort of response committee, and then make decisions that are going to ultimately move the organization in a different direction should something bad or untoward happen? The next slide, Sean. Again, there was the communication piece that I talked about, understanding and having a firm grasp of sort of what people are talking about externally, but also how you're going to communicate internally are vital. And the handful of questions that are in the assessment tool, I think, judging on the stuff that has come back over the last couple of weeks, lends us to believe that that's one of the gaps that maybe exists today. The public health piece is another important one. It sort of identifies the fact that you need to have significant contact points with public health in your province and your territory. Understanding the contact tracing, and I will say, having read what I've read about Alberta, you're one of the provinces that have a significant jump on most of the other provinces in terms of contact tracing, and I think it was A/B tracing, I think is the reference. But it's a great tool, and I think it's one of those things that is in the assessment. It's certainly in the Alberta plan, and it's one of the things that needs to be adhered to as we sort of move forward. A significant part of the assessment tool is also covering off just areas of mitigation, how you're going to find different things to do within your organization that is going to limit and mitigate the risk of contraction. As I said before, a lot of those are operational and a lot of those are technical. So I'm going to highlight one in particular, and if you can move to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Jason because it's a considerable one that he and his technical committee have done a significant amount of work on. But it's just one of those areas that you can modify your sessions in order to further mitigate and further understand areas that you can sort of drive risk down. So Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Earl. I'll start off by echoing Earl's comments earlier and thanking both Sean Lowther and Sean Hammond for the work that they've done with the staff at Alberta Soccer and the board there. It's a challenge to adapt and evolve based on constantly changing realities. And I think they've done an excellent job putting together a solid plan to resume soccer in as safe a means as possible. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we face in this country. Our nation is the greatest on the planet, and I'm a firm believer it's the best place in the world to live. But essentially, we are the size of continental Europe, and we have 13 different realities. So trying to come up with a plan and a system that works for all 13 at the same time is a real challenge. So what we did with the technical committee is we looked at some of the things that you should take into consideration as you are starting back your soccer programming. So right away, the first consideration was, at what age are children able to understand the concept of physical distancing and social distancing? Those of you who are parents, I'm a parent myself. I've got teenagers; they're a little bit older. They can understand these things, but you may have multiple children in your household. Your 8-year-old daughter may fully well understand social distancing, and your 10-year-old son might not. So how do you then mitigate that in a training environment, in a practice where if they lose control of the ball, it goes out of their area, all of a sudden they're coming into contact with their peers, and they're high-fiving, and they're wanting to be with their friends. So one of the things that we had talked about in great detail is, how do we mitigate that? And one of the concepts that we put into this document on this slide here is the idea that a parent, a guardian, or a sibling, maybe an older sibling perhaps, from the same household, could participate in a training session with some of the younger age groups. So active start, fundamentals, possibly even into the learn to train, depending on the cognitive development of the players in question. Some of them at that age, 10 to 12, 13 years old, might be fine. They may still need a little bit of guidance. So that sort of concept of going away from the traditional concept of a team. We have a group of 7-year-olds, they're on a team together. Perhaps we need to think a little bit differently about that and include the parents or the guardians or an older sibling. Because at younger ages, children often need a little bit more guidance and a little bit more assurance. So that's one of the considerations to take into mind when you're looking to go back to your training sessions. Obviously, the reality in Alberta has changed even this week in terms of what the public health authority there is recommending. Where I live in Ontario right now, we've just gone from social gatherings of 5 people up to 10 people. So you can see that we're considerably behind Alberta and where they are in terms of their management of this situation. So what we're not saying to everyone is you all must do the same thing. What we are saying is you need to take these things into consideration. So dependent on the age of the players in question that you're working with, you may need to have some mitigation strategies to ensure that the social distancing does take place, whether it's in a practice or whether it's in a game format, if you are playing a game format. So that's the main piece on this slide that I want to get across. We always say too as well, be conservative with your spacing. So if you're asking players to maintain social distancing within a training environment, perhaps you're working on individual technical skill development. I mean, that's sort of the starting point for getting kids back on the field and playing with a soccer ball. They can do that, one player, one ball, in an environment, in a space that's their own space. And they can still manage and ensure that they're not coming into contact with too many other people. I love the cohort term, that concept of keeping a smaller group of people together as a cohort so that you mitigate the amount of contact they have with other cohorts. And that's something that I think as a club technical leader or as a coach that you'd want to take into consideration when you're structuring your practice. So can you keep a smaller group of players together as a smaller group to do that individual work or some of that passing work that you may be looking to introduce early on, rather than having everyone mixing all together all the time? The more you expand that contact bubble that they're in, the more chance or risk you're exposing players to. So I think that's an important consideration as well. Obviously, with the younger players, you want to give them more space as much as they possibly can. As the kids get a little older, a little bit easier for them to understand the concept of social distancing is obviously something that you can take into consideration with your spacing in terms of the drills and activities that you're doing with your players in training. One of the things that we had asked all of the provinces and territories to consider in their return to play, and you'll see it in Alberta Soccer's return to play, is a multi-phase approach. So obviously these considerations were written that you're seeing on the screen now for phase 1, which is the first starting point for some provinces. Now, obviously, in Alberta, if you've already gone beyond that and you've expanded what that cohort size can be, these might not be as relevant for you as they may be in a place like Ontario, for example, who will be starting out at individual technical work. So really, it's about being fluid. It's about being on top of information, about following your provincial health authorities' guidance and guidelines on this, working with Alberta Soccer to ensure that you're creating the safest environment possible for kids to come back and start playing the game that they love to play. Earl, that was all I had. If you want to carry on from here and take on the next slide.
Awesome, I will. So what I'll do too is just very briefly sort of wrap up what I've seen sort of coming out of Alberta in terms of the tool itself. And it's important to remember that the tool is, again, not an approval tool. It is a self-evaluation, a self-assessment tool of what you've been doing on the ground and what you hope to be doing down the road. So it was ideally meant for it to be used by a club after they've had a deep look at the Alberta Soccer return to train plan, and after they've had given some consideration to their own return to play plan, and then had the ability to sort of go through the questions, assess themselves, have a firm understanding of how they're mitigating that risk internally. And then if it provided 2 or 3 additional opportunities that clubs hadn't realized existed before to further mitigate, then that would be great. You know, I think when we look through the high level risk evaluation, in most situations in Alberta, you're probably going to find yourself with sort of 3 out of those 6 risks. And if you did no mitigation on the other side, your worst case scenario was going to have you in a high moderate category. So my suggestion to the group is that if you're still in that moderate category after you've gone through the assessment tool, you probably aren't doing enough to further drive that mitigation down. You really should be in a low to very low situation. And I would suggest that if you're doing just what the Alberta plan says to do, which is significant, you're going to drive that risk down into a very low, if not a very low categorization. So that's all I'll talk about the tool. What I will talk about now is a significant portion of the tool that identifies sort of a response action plan. And the slides themselves will sort of speak to what we were looking to do, but what I will say is that in some situations in the country, and I'll use BC as an example, their sport arm within the British Columbia government, via Sport, I think it is, have come out with their own sort of response plan. I think the only other province that did the same was Quebec. So in the absence of some of the other provinces doing it, we thought we would provide our organizations a very high level, very quick and easy response action plan to deal with situations in emergencies, to deal with situations where an outbreak occurred at your club. And we've shared that with all of our member associations. I'm going to talk about the sort of the 3 to 6 areas that make up that plan at a very, very high level. If you're looking to kind of get the plan itself, or if it's not embedded into the Alberta plan already, I'm sure Sean would be happy to share with you. So it was our feeling that one of the key and major points of the plan needed to be what we call a SPOC, a single point of contact at the club where everyone, coaches, staff, officials, and all the families knew who that person was and how to make contact with that individual. They should be the conduit for all things COVID-19 at your club. The second piece was that communication system. Always being consistent with both federal and provincial privacy regulations, of course. Coaches, staff, officials, families of the players should all sort of self-report to this single point of contact if they've got symptoms, if there's a positive test recorded at the club, or if they've been exposed with someone within that sort of last 14-day period. The advice should be always for individuals to stay at home. And again, that should be very clear to individuals at your club, that they should not be returned until they are well enough based off of Public Health Agency of Canada, provincial and territorial health agency guidelines as well. Next slide, please, Sean. The other important piece to this was having the ability to isolate, right? I think it's an important part. Make sure that if coaches, staff, officials, players, families, first of all, know that they should not attend a club activity if they're sick. And if they are, they should notify the SPOC. But if they should come down with COVID-19 symptoms and show those symptoms at a club activity, your club should have the ability to isolate, should have the ability to separate those people from the rest of the group and get them home as quickly as possible. Then have a plan in place for what they're going to do with the other people at the club who have come in contact with them. The next sounds pretty simple and easy, but the clean and disinfect areas piece, important to close off areas that have been used by someone who has come in contact. Not to use these areas until after they've been cleaned and disinfected, and constantly ensure the safe and correct use, storage, etc. of that cleaning information or cleaning tools, and keep them away from children. And finally, there was a very key piece to this is, again, in accordance with federal, provincial, territorial laws, privacy, confidentiality, regulations, etc. The single point of contact should be able to notify local health officials. They should have a deep relationship with health officials. They should create a rapport with municipal or provincial health officials at the same time. And they should be working with the club to develop a reporting system, a close contact log, tracing logs, those sorts of things, to be able to make sure that when and if public health comes to them, because that's who the single point of contact would be, to start to identify key contacts within the clubs, working back through some tracing. There's a clean record at your club to be able to provide them with. And that was really it. So again, I'll turn it back over to you, Sean. I'll stick around because I know there might be some questions at the back end. But again, I just want to thank Alberta Soccer, thanks the two Seans for the work they've done to get us here. And quite honestly, thank this group for the heavy lifting that you've done to get us here too, and the patience that you've shown over these last sort of 80+ days. So thanks very much, Sean.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate that. Just so everyone is aware, I'm having some IT issues and sometimes my screens go blank and I have to fix them. So I apologize if the screens are going blank at times. In regards to questions, we will ask questions of the panelists at the end, rather than stopping and asking those questions now. So Noel Grisdale, aka Bite Your Legs Grisdale, who was a decent player when he was younger, will be on now.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, just to reiterate, I guess, for those who weren't on earlier, I'm a family physician practicing rural medicine in Black Diamond for the last 25 years, hospital work, office, ER, that kind of stuff. And as Sean pointed out, I'm not on here due to my soccer ability. I have played the game for about 45 years, but more importantly, I'm a parent, and I've helped coach my kids and can understand the perspective of a parent with children playing the game and the challenges we're all facing coming out of the lockdown. So that's really what I'm on the call for, is to try and pair my medical knowledge and my soccer knowledge to give you guys some perspective, hopefully answer questions that anyone may have. When it comes to managing risk, actually, before I get there, I think it was highlighted earlier, but I think it's really important just to, again, identify that the return to train, return to play plans were developed with the expertise of Alberta Health Services, working with the Alberta Soccer Association, and input from other membership organizations in the province. As I think everyone understands, the challenges with this new virus is that the information is changing all the time. You would have seen, and sometimes it's very frustrating, I think, for all of us, that medical experts, through research, through new information, are learning new things. And so what we see today may change going forward. The critical part really is that to manage risk, go back to the basics, which has been hammered into us over the last, the last 3 months, I think, which is the hand washing, the physical distancing, and really not touching your face, etc. I don't think that can be emphasized enough. That what we do as individuals, and if we can communicate that to our clubs, to our teams, etc., you're much more likely to have individual success of keeping healthy, your players healthy, but also obviously the collective keeping healthy. Which, if we do that, which we minimize outbreaks, which allows us to keep playing the game that we love. So I think it is really critical to follow the guidelines as best you can. Really using common sense, and if we do that, I mean, obviously we're happy and thrilled to be back to where we're at. But really, what we all want to get back to is playing the game the way we're used to playing it. And I think the success early on will help us dictate to the longer term success of getting back to full on games much sooner. I don't think there was anything else specific that I had to share other than, I think the contact tracing was the only other piece. Was just briefly, Sean, is the critical part about the guidelines, and I think those from Canada Soccer highlighted is that for us to have success, if we're following the guidelines, it's going to be much easier to contact trace, which allows us to keep things controlled as far as spread, which allows us to keep playing, again, which keeps us all happy and healthy, so both mentally and physically. So I would leave it at that.
Thank you, very much appreciated. Stephen Indig from Sport Law Strategy Group will have some comments now.
Okay, good evening. Good evening, everybody. Like Jason, I'm calling in from Ontario, so it's a bit later here. I've been following a lot of the comments and questions that are being populated in the chat, and it seems people are, of course, very excited to get back on the pitch and play the game. I've been saying this for a couple months, and I think you've heard all of the previous presenters say this as well. Hurry up and slow down. And what I mean by that is we really have one chance at doing this and probably doing it well. And I really think that we have to be cautious on the way we return back to sport, the way we return back to normalcy. And I did a presentation this morning with a cycling group here in Ontario, and it was actually interesting to talk about concussion management rather than talking about COVID. So that was a nice change. And a lot of the conversation was about negligence and liability and what's our exposure and are our directors personally liable. And somebody wrote into the chat box to say, all those things are fine and dandy, but at the end of the day, really, this is about people's health. So I think we have to remember that as we go back into play, is that really what we're looking at is to make sure the pandemic is controlled and that people are safe. So, God forbid we go back and we do something too quickly or we don't do it appropriately and there's a breakout and people are on ventilators or sick or in hospitals. That's, again, not what we want to do. And I'm going to segue that into the legal perspective. And sometimes the law and the reality and the humanistic side of things don't always intermingle, and I realize that. So I'm going to table the insurance part and kind of move it back down a little bit, but I want to start talking about negligence. And negligence is really the bane of risk management in sport, particularly. Negligence is the reason people would sue. It's because somebody didn't do something or they should have done something differently to prevent an injury. And in order to be negligent, a person or an organization would have to answer yes to those 4 bullet points that you see. So me as a coach or a organization, a club or a PSO or an NSO for that matter, do I have a duty of care? Do I have an obligation of responsibility to the people under my control, under my umbrella? Of course, the answer in sport is usually pretty black and white, and the answer is yes. The next component would be, did I breach my standard of care? And that's really what Dr. Grisdale and Marvin and Steve and Jason and Earl are talking about, is what does this new standard of care look like? And And really, it's based on really 4 factors. It's based on written regulations, trends in the industry, case law, which on COVID there obviously is none, and following, the last part would be your gut, reasonableness. Would it be reasonable to have done what you did? And there's ample cases in sport to suggest that even though somebody was injured, and there's cases as extreme as athletes becoming paralyzed, not being the organization not being liable because they have been able to control the standard of care and do everything reasonable to create a safe environment. And really that's what today is about, is looking at all the assessment tools and the return to sport guidelines and the ASA plan. And really that starts establishing that standard of care. And that's the area to which we have the most control. That's why I'm saying hurry up and slow down. We need to make sure that you, as you return to sport, can implement those guidelines. The third part of the test is causation. Did my breach of my standard lead to the injury? And of course, was there an actual injury? So if I trip and fall and get back up and keep playing the game of soccer and there's no damage, there's no lawsuit, there's no negligence. If I fall and break my ankle and I'm unable to work for 3 months, then there's damages there. So in order to be negligent, I have to say yes, yes, yes. And right now the big concern, of course, is as we go back to play is what's the organization's responsibility to create that safe environment? And I'm going to segue that into these risk management techniques that really everybody's talking about. So as I just said, the one to which we have the most control is exactly how we return back to sport. And looking at all those documents that the CSA and Alberta and Marvin and Steve have created on behalf of Sport Alberta, Alberta Sport Connect, you're always changing your name. So, that again establishes that standard. So again, we have that control. The other thing that's come up as I've done a lot of these sessions over the last couple months is the corporate shield. And in Alberta, if you're a not-for-profit, you'd be deemed a society. And when you are a society or an incorporated entity, you get legal protection from liability by that corporate entity. So if you are not an incorporated entity, the liability vests with you personally. The law recognizes 2 things, corporations and societies for Alberta, as well as people. So if I'm looking to sue an organization for a negligence claim, and of course, again, the hot topic now is COVID, but if I look to sue an organization for a negligence claim, and there is no corporate entity, I am coming after the individuals who run that organization. So I really, really advocate, and I've said this even pre-COVID, that anybody running a sport organization should be incorporated, either as a for-profit or a not-for-profit society, to enable yourself to have that corporate shield to protect your personal assets from that responsibility. It's embedded in legislation when we talk about indemnity for directors, as well as those involved or in that corporate shield. So really something to look at as we move forward with return to sport. And the reason I tabled the insurance part, and Steve will talk about this, another Steve will talk about this in a few minutes, is most of you are probably aware, depending on when your insurance was renewed, there's likely now a contagious disease exclusion in your insurance policy. And what that means is your insurance company or your insurance policy will no longer provide defense litigation costs in the case of litigation, or payment of damages if there are any damages related to a contagious disease issue. Sean and I have talked, and Sean, you could shake your head. I believe ASA does not have COVID coverage. Your renewal has already happened. The exclusion exists. So people have to recognize, and again, I go back to that hurry up and slow down, is that if there is litigation, you are on your own with respect to those legal fees and potential damages. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So how do we protect ourselves going back into sport, without insurance on a COVID-related claim? We've talked about the standard of care. We've talked about implementing all those reasonable steps of cleanliness, social distancing, cohorts. Other ways are, of course, waivers, assumption of risks, and declarations. So I'm going to go down a little bunny hole about waivers because I think there's a lot of misconception about them, and I'll try and provide some clarity to that. A waiver is not a "you can't sue me" document. It doesn't prevent people from suing. I could hang up and find out the name of 455 people on this call today, fill out a statement of claim, and you'd be in the middle of a lawsuit. Where a waiver comes into play is I would make an argument about that. I'll pick on Marvin. I can see his face here. Marvin, you agreed to play the game of soccer. You knew the risks that you were going to be exposed to, and you said you wouldn't sue us. And I'm relying on that contract to say you wouldn't. And of course, the judge is going to say, I agree, case dismissed, or he's going to say, I don't care, I want to hear the case. But without the document, you can't make the argument. And another great thing about the document is it depends on how it's written, but I like to see two things in there. There are two types of risks in sport. We just talked about negligence, and we would call that the legal risk. The other risk in sport is the inherent risk of sport. When I play the game of soccer, I'm consenting to grass burns, rolled ankles, being maybe hit with a soccer ball, running into another player, those inherent risks that come with our sport. And by playing the game, you actually don't even need a waiver to waive inherent risk. By stepping on the pitch, you assume that liability. So I've got the negligence and I've got the inherent risk of sport. So I like the document, again, for two reasons. One, you're saying you're not going to sue me. And two, I've been very clear to you to suggest what the risks are in the game of soccer and COVID, and I'm coming back and agreeing to accept that risk. So again, I like it from a defense mechanism. You probably all heard people say they're not worth the paper they're written on, and a good legal to the answer to that is maybe. And the reason I say it is really because there's lots of different factors that are important. You have to be named as a party in the waiver. You cannot be relying on a document to which you are not named. Again, think about it as a contract. If I have a contract between Marvin and I, Steve Patrick can't try and enforce that because he is not a party to that contract. So one, make sure your name or your organization is on that document. Two, make sure it includes the specific risks that we just spoke about. And three, make sure it's signed. And if you have the ability to have a witness, do it. If you have the ability to have kids between the age of 13 to 18 sign it, do it. It's all about understanding the exposure that they're putting themselves into. And that's what we're trying to say is, hey, you knew what you were getting yourself into, and we were very explicit about that. So with all that being said, I want to throw a little wrench in there. Waivers are enforceable against adults, all right? Adults. Children, minors, cannot sign contracts that are not a benefit to them. Saying to an organization, I'm not going to sue you is not a benefit. Parents cannot sign that right away on behalf of children. And that's why in those situations, we recommend what we call an assumption of risk document, which speaks to the risks that the person is being exposed to without asking them to waive the right to sue. Okay, so very important to try and remember those distinctions. And part of the ASA policies that we've been working on and documents, you will get those two documents. The last part has been addressed a little bit by the CSA and by Steve Patrick, is about the declaration, and asking those questions about, do you have COVID? Have you been exposed? Again, do those as often as possible. What we're trying to do is transfer the risk back to the individual and not with the organization. The last thing I'm going to try and do is I did a session last week, and there was a personal injury litigation lawyer on the call, and it was actually really beneficial because you have to understand the mentality of a personal injury lawyer who does the suing. A couple things. What are they looking for? Financial gain. So if there's no money to be had out of the organization, it's very unlikely that they will seek litigation. This is a terrible thing to say, but those of you who have a large reserve fund, this is one of the risks of having that, and you may want to look at different ways of sheltering that money if possible. The other thing is most personal injury lawyers work on contingency fee, and what that means is they get a piece of the amount awarded. So if I win $100,000, the lawyer would likely take somewhere around 30%, which would be $30,000, and that's how they're compensated. Otherwise, the claimant is paying the lawyer an hourly rate, which these days is anywhere between $300 and $800 an hour. Is a claimant prepared to pay for that? So, you know, without having insurance coverage on contagious disease, people are very apprehensive about going back. I am not one of those people. I think the likelihood of litigation is very small. I think the ability to prove negligence, as we said in the first part of the presentation, particularly did I breach my standard of care, or did I cause your damage? You know, Mr. Dobish, have you gone to the grocery store today? Yes. Mr. Dobish, have you talked to any other individual other than people at soccer? Yes. So to prove that you actually picked it up on the pitch is going to be very challenging. And then depending on what the damages are, so if poor Marvin, I apologize, buddy, I'll buy you a beer next time I see you, you know, was it you were on, you know, were you unable to work for weeks, or were you asymptomatic? Because if you're asymptomatic, there's no damage. So that's why I'm a big advocate of not waiting to go back to sport, but I am a big advocate of doing it right, doing it slowly, doing it cautiously. So I'm going to stop there, Sean, and pass it. I always like to pass the lawyer to the insurance guy.
Thank you, Steve. Stephen Beeston for AON will make a brief presentation. Stephen, we can't hear you.
He's on mute.
Sorry about that, everyone. I had my cell phone muted as well as everything else. So what I was saying is thanks to I'll keep this short because Stephen Indig actually spoke a lot about what I wanted to touch on, and I know everybody wants to get to stage 9 after this. Nobody wants to hear the insurance guy talk. So one of the things that we have to be cautious of right now is returning too early. Steve Indig's comment of hurry up and slow down. We really need to be cautious here. We have the ability to do this right and to do this very well. I understand that everybody wants to get back to playing, back to training, playing games, etc. But we have to be able to follow everything that legal is bringing forward, and all participants, you need to review the guidelines, whether it's coaches, players, and parents on behalf of the minors. You need to know the guidelines and what you're getting yourself into. The whole concept of inherent risk. Yeah, once you step on the pitch, there are risks that you automatically assume. So when we look at the insurance perspective of things here, three things that I really want to make clear is everybody needs to review the return to train guidelines prior to engaging in the activity. That goes without saying, in my opinion, but I know that some people out there, as well as children and minors, they might not understand these things. When it comes to the actual insurance applying, the liability waiver and declaration of compliance, they need to be signed prior to the activity. So if you can have your kids read these, sign them between, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, the age that you mentioned, 13 to 18, I think that's what it was. Make sure that they read it, and try to get them to understand it to the best of their ability. These all need to be signed before we go back to play. Last, and those of you that were at the Alberta Soccer AGM and listened to my presentation, one of the biggest things that the insurance policy needs to have is Alberta Soccer must sanction the activity. And the sanctioned activities, to my knowledge, from what Sean Lowther has provided me, is going to follow the guidelines that they've set out. I understand that a lot of you want to get back to the way things are, see some normalcy back in life, but we have to do things the right way, and we have to do it before we can actually take, or the old crawl before you walk and walk before you run concept. So, Sean, can you just flip to the next slide there? So, before I get into this piece about no coverage applying, Steve Indig did mention that he wasn't sure if we have a contagious disease exclusion. Right now, from the time that we return to train until September 19th at 11:59 p.m., we do not have a contagious disease exclusion. We are lucky because we have passed everything through our insurers after they've been looked at by Steve Indig and Sport Law. They've been reviewed, they've been approved, everything is good. If we start moving too fast and things get out of control, the insurers have already told us that they might view that as a material change in risk. If we move too fast, that material change in risk then brings that exclusion in, and coverage will not apply. And to what Steve had mentioned earlier, there won't be any defense costs for the association, for anybody that's insured under the policy. We want to make sure that everybody that is going to be engaging in any activity related to training is safe, and they understand that, or what to do during training. If somebody does say they're asymptomatic and they fall ill during the session, we know what to do. Last point that I'm going to touch on, with new guidelines that came out by by the government of Alberta yesterday, I caution against moving too quickly. Once again, I'm the insurance guy. I'm gonna caution against moving too fast, because it's, in my opinion, that's not proper risk mitigation. And we want to keep the risk down, and we want to make sure that everybody is safe during play. So, Sean, that's all I have. So you can move forward.
Thank you, Stephen. So like most other people on this call, I'm a soccer guy first and foremost. And now we can start talking about soccer a little bit, which is good to do. I'm just going to give a quick overview of the return to train document. I'm not going to go line by line. I think that would be too boring. So we'll just do a high level quick scan of it, and then we'll take questions at the end. I have some FAQs or some questions that came up when people registered. So we will speak to them and then look to speak to more questions at the end of this presentation. So the structure of Alberta, the structure of soccer in Alberta is, as you see on the screen, player, coaches register, volunteers, up to the local club, to their district, into Alberta Soccer, into the Canadian Soccer Association, and then they're governed by CONCACAF and FIFA above that. So most people know that. I just thought I'd throw that up there. And although we want to try and have as much clarity as possible in this document, just like Jason and Earl said, the realities in different parts of the country is the same in Alberta. So if you're in Calgary, it's different if you're in Vulcan, Alberta. So obviously it's been hard to just embody everybody, but we've done the best that we can. And I think we've put together a pretty solid plan. So we'll just go through it a bit more. So just an introduction. We've spent a bit of time trying to get confirmation from everybody in regards to going ahead and playing this game that we all love. And that has happened. So Canada Soccer, we've worked with the Alberta government. We've worked with our insurers. and certainly our legal counsel as well to get this together. I think we've done a good job, and if I look at the guidelines we put in place, it's very well done. It's been lots of compliments throughout Canada and other sports, so it's pretty decent. Return to train. The modified training will happen after June 12th, which is this Friday. Our intent is to then move to phase 2 on or after June 19th, 2020, with modified games and modified training. Phase 3 is getting back to regular soccer. So that's with, the government say everything's back to normal, go ahead and have your regular games. So obviously we've got to take into account the recent developments that happened with the government yesterday in regards to cohorts, and that will be a big component of the games that we put together, or districts with the clubs put together. So there's lots of flexibility there with that, a cohort of 50. I'm sure there's lots of people with good imagination can figure out how to have some competitions using that cohort of 50. We'll respond to the conditions. Right now we are where it's highlighted on the screen. We want to get to phase 2, return to games. June 19th hopefully is a date that we'll do that, but we have to work through the ramifications to get there. If there's a problem and the government says no, things aren't going well, you must return back to phase 1, then we would do that. So we have to be fairly flexible and nimble to make sure that is done. Our return to train, stage 1, this is where we're at. Individual clubs and teams are going to look at the Alberta Soccer plan and have those minimum standards. And then they will also do a self-assessment tool with Canada Soccer, get some feedback from Canada Soccer. That assessment tool is very quick, gets into Canada Soccer and it's sent back right away. It gets sent back to me as well as the club. Canada Soccer are working on trying to automate it so it'll go to the district directly. Right now I am forwarding that information onto the districts, but at some stage, and I'm hopeful that'll happen in the next few days, it'll be automatically sent to the district. And the feedback is on that self-assessment form. Once that is done, clubs, districts can start to play training, or start to train starting on Friday, adhering to the guidelines we put in place. So it's a fairly quick process. Couple of items. Like I said, I haven't got the whole document on here, but on page 9, I've highlighted in bold, which I think will stay in place when we go to the modified game stage 2. They will stay in this document, and we'll just change things and add and delete and edit for the other items that must be adhered to. Can someone put their on mute? Thanks. So again, that's just a bunch of stuff that we put in there with links to resources, etc. We will update with the new guidelines to go to stage 2. We expect that to be done fairly quickly and get that out to everyone to look at it. Again, some more guidelines that we'll keep in. Some of them we'll edit or remove. Spectators is an interesting one, where initially we didn't have spectators. The new guidelines will allow that. So again, just a bunch of information that we will adjust and get that out to you guys fairly quickly. Same from some organizational guidelines. Quite a bit in there will stay in, and we will add a few new items. But again, the contact tracing is massive, and that must be done by a responsible adult. Records will be changed to 2 weeks. That's the latest guidelines we got in place. So we'll make those adjustments fairly quickly. And then the same with these guidelines with coaching, training sessions must be over 18, etc. Maybe have a group of coaches that you can work with. It's important that if you do want to use coaches in different groups, that they're not part of the cohort. and they have physical distancing with everyone that they work with. Otherwise, they will only be able to coach with that cohort group. We put a bunch of resources into this document, Appendix 1, which is on page 14 of your document. We'll add more in with the new guidelines put forward by the Government of Alberta. So that list will extend. It's 2 pages right now. The tracing log, which we've talked about, there's an example. Obviously, you can do your own or look to go digital with it. I mean, I believe there's a bunch of companies are offering that to trace. But that's up to you. But we do have those samples in the document, and I did send them out individually in Word so that they could be customized to your club, etc. We have a bunch of checklists in the document. This is the player checklist. We have them for coaches, for clubs, parents, etc. We will make some adjustments on these as well for the second document. But I'd like to thank Airdrie Soccer, Melissa, who actually put these together, and we stole those documents and put into our plan. Bunch of FAQs. I will go through them quickly, and then we'll look to get on to questions for anyone on the panel. But these are all from questions that were put in when you registered to get onto this seminar webinar. So the first one, has testing for COVID-19 is open to everybody. Could parents that are already tested negative be allowed to observe training sessions from the sidelines? In phase 2 will be allowed, not in phase 1. The tracing and tracking will be done by clubs. Spectators will be allowed to leave their car after that. Ball sharing is allowed. It's foot-to-foot training in phase 1. We add in additional sharing in phase 2. Fees to register for an individual player, that's up to the club or community. This fees of return to play are not tied directly to the Government of Alberta, but we use their guidelines to allow us to move forward to the next level. CSA response plan has been given to districts, a template that was talked about by Earl, who approves the clubs to get back on the field. That will be the districts with ASA. Spectators will be allowed in phase 2, as already mentioned. In phase 2, we will look to bring younger age groups in, where phase 1 is those players born in 2011. Goalkeeping will occur in phase 2, but not in phase 1, the training. It is a requirement from CSA that the risk assessment tool gets completed for all organizations. In regards to insurance, clubs, organizations should have their own directors and officers insurance in place to cover the board if they're named in a suit. Yes, in regards to the checklist, when you're asking coaches and participants and players, you should ask the players individually, particularly the players, because you'll get one person saying yes and then everyone will say yes. So it's important that you do that individually. Academies must adhere to these guidelines, pay their endorsement fee, and they must have their own insurance. They're not covered at all by Alberta Soccer Insurance. Goalkeeper training again in phase 2. Phase 1, actually you can have shooting, but you can't have goalkeepers in place. There's no touching the ball with their hands in the phase 1, as per the initial guidelines. Another one about the academy is the exact same answer. They have their own insurance. It's up to districts to decide what they want to do with league play or have cup competitions. We will not dictate to the districts what they do. Again, the young players in phase 2 will be allowed. We'll start with practices, and you must follow the guidelines. Length of season, that'll be determined by the district as well. In phase 2, there's no age restriction. In regards to training, if symptomatic, and they get a test, and maybe get our doctor on the line, Mr. Grisdale, or Dr. Grisdale, to answer that after I finish these last few. Coaches' responsibilities, obviously got to wash their hands, have good sanitation, possibly look after the equipment if there's no staff provided by the club. Club or district's going to be responsible for PPE. Again, we'll get the young players in phase 2. Vulnerable persons must not participate, so kids with asthma and health conditions shouldn't participate. Tracing should be stored by the club or the district. If a coach or player doesn't practice social distancing, contact your club and district. Again, to follow up with these concerns, contact them. They will have to take care of that. The plans will be communicated through the district or the club. Phase 2 will start after June 19th if everything goes well. Restrictions will be put in place by AHS to get to phase 2, which has already been done. If there's a spike and we have to close down, that's determined by the Alberta Health Services and Government of Alberta. We have no say in that. That is their prerogative to stop sport. Season formats will be put in place by the districts. We won't dictate what they have to do. If you're following protocols, then obviously you're not accountable if a child gets sick. Districts will determine the length of the season. We are trying to get the season going. This is what this is all about. So returning to the first phase is a start. Hopefully we'll move on quickly. We'll send a link to everybody on this call and to all the districts that they can share with people that didn't get on the call. The ball can be shared. In regards to funding, so Heritage Fund has now gone to the province of Alberta, and the ministry is determining how that is going to be distributed, how much money each sport gets. And part of the funding will be to pass monies down to the districts. That's a guideline that Sport Canada put in. So that will happen once we get that information. There was a question about, because pro teams are playing, why can't we? Well, they have millions and millions of dollars to spend on best practices. They test constantly. So it's not fair comparing community sport to professional teams. And is the risk worth it? Is it worth all the trouble? Well, obviously there's risk involved in this, but as people have mentioned, it's important that we do get back playing for the physical and mental health of our participants that love this game so much. Again, a medical opinion on post-symptom restrictions. We'll ask Dr. Grisdale to talk about that. Restricted games with cohorts will be allowed in phase 2. And then physical distances can be applied in practice settings for sure, but not in games. Shouldn't wear masks. It's not recommended. The 7s and 8s will get involved in phase 2. Same with the under 10s. Tracing logs should be completed either by a responsible adult at the field, or you could do it online. And then goalkeeper training allowed in phase 2. Our grid examples that we put on in the document didn't have gaps between the grids. That's correct. There should be a safe zone between each grid. It was more for the way it looked, why the tech staff didn't put that in. We don't determine registration fees. That's done by the districts and clubs. It's up to the districts and clubs whether they're going to offer a modified season or not. Again, we can't mandate that. Summer camps, they can start in phase 2. 10 players only allowed in summer camps. Phase 2, hopefully, June 19th will get going. The phases are determined by the government, not by Alberta Soccer or Canada Soccer. Again, younger players in phase 2. We should expect indoor to open. Phase 2, the keepers can use their hands. You need to have a contact log for tracing. We are not linked to the phases of relaunch, but rather the guidelines that get put in place. And this will be available offline. Indoor waivers will be different than outdoor. It's a new season. We don't have plans per se, as we didn't know what the guidelines would be to going into stage 2, and then stage 3 is back to regular soccer. The risk assessment tool, like mentioned previously, is very quick getting it back. 2012 players weren't included because it's difficult to keep them physically distanced apart. The districts have the risk assessment tool. It does not negate insurance, the youth waiver. We still have insurance. Club districts should supply stuff to the coaches and trainers, and then phase 2 introduces larger gatherings. Anyone breaches return to trade protocols, they can be brought in front of a discipline panel. We talked about the 2012s. The waivers through the districts is adequate. Again, younger kids in phase 2. All the information is on the Biz Connect in regards to facilities. The club or district is monitoring the protocols. Parents can drop off and watch from their vehicles. Again, younger players later on. That is it. I know that was boring. I apologize for that. But those are the questions that we did get. Our next steps will be to analyze government documentation, adjust our return to play plan, get the plan to the board for approval, get it published out to everybody, and then get stage 2 operational. So that is the plan. I know we've gone through this quickly. You've had time to read it. So we will look to go with some more questions. So if I can ask Carmen to maybe read out some questions, and then whoever needs to answer those questions can do so.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, Carmen.
Okay, just give me a second here.
Just while we're going, I'm Stephen Patrick here with Government of Alberta. I've seen a few questions with regards to the screening document, so I do have some answers there. One of the questions that's occurring is if people have seasonal allergies, do they have to quarantine for 14 days? Do they have to stay home? And the answer Dr. Hinshaw provided yesterday was that when you're asking these questions with the screening, it can be shortness of breath or difficulty breathing or sneezing, etc. that's unexplained. So if they have allergies, it should not preclude them from participating. The second one, the latest document has a muscle and joint aches section on the government document. And again, we're returning from play after 4 months of sitting on the couch and playing the Xbox. If our joints are sore that that can be explained by return to sport, then that's not something that again would preclude somebody from participating. And finally, there was a question. We do state, have you or anyone in your household returned from travel outside of Canada in the last 14 days? Dr. Hinshaw clarified that yesterday. If say dad is a pilot and has a federal exemption, again, that should not preclude participation. It should be if anyone has returned from outside of Canada and has COVID symptoms, then participants should not play until those are resolved. But certainly, if exemptions are in place, then that shouldn't prevent someone from participating.
Okay, Sean. First question would be, could you please explain how the following statement on page 5 of the return to play guidelines will work? Member clubs zones will complete the risk management tool developed by Canada Soccer receive feedback on identified risks, and approval from Alberta Soccer and their home district to proceed.
Yeah, so the risk management tool will be completed by the organization. That will go straight to Canada Soccer. From that, there will be email generated, basically automatically. Bill can chime in at some point if he wishes. And it will go back to the club with a score. Very low, low, moderate, high, I think are the 4 risks. And if it goes back low or very low, then obviously there's not an issue. Goes back moderate, there may be some items that need to be looked at to bring that score down. And then based upon that, the district and Alberta Soccer will have a conversation. The district says, yeah, it's good. Off you go and you can start your return to train.
Okay. I might have missed a couple, but I'll do a review after.
There was quite a few questions about cohorts, about if a player was playing another sport, can they be in a cohort with one sport and in a cohort with soccer? So Stephen, can you answer that one?
Yeah, so the intention of the cohort is that it is one per athlete. So they would, if they are multi-sport or if they are playing academy, that would need to be taken into consideration. You should not be in 2 cohorts at once. Now, the understanding is certainly that that siblings are also in cohorts. Mom and dad may also be in cohorts. There are family cohorts that are limited up to 15 for social purposes. There are performance cohorts, which are playing instruments, which are also 50. So there is, it does expand fairly quickly in terms of exposure. So Dr. Hinshaw and Alberta Health has indicated that ideally those, if you're in a cohort, it is limited to 50 and it is one cohort at this time.
I have a question about if one of my players had COVID a couple of months ago, but has since quarantined, can they practice?
It's Noel Grisdale. So I think what they're saying is if they had COVID and obviously it was proven COVID positive and they've recovered, can they practice? The challenge there, I think, that we're going to face, and again, this is with the changing information and the virus and how it affects each individual, is and they may have to clarify with their doc from documentation, just from a liability perspective. But ideally, having a negative test prior to returning, would be the ultimate if it were me, just from a liability perspective. What we've been telling people is 14 days, and you've recovered, then you can return to work or return to activity, etc. But each individual can decide, I guess, family, etc. Because there is evidence that sometimes people continue to be positive on their tests 3 or 4 weeks later. The view is currently, and this can change, is that they're not shedding much virus at that point. So I guess long roundabout way, I'm telling you that the standard of care or the approach would be 14 days. And if you're no longer symptomatic, you'd return to work, return to activity, and they should be able to train and play.
Okay, thank you. And then there are a number of questions about call-up players for training or for games, or trialists. We're just looking for clarification on that, if it's permitted.
Say that again, Carmen, sorry, I didn't hear.
There's a number of questions about call-ups for training or for games, trialists. So looking for a clarification on whether or not that would be permitted.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not in the cohort, then not for modified games, no.
What do we? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Stephen here. I think if they're in their own cohort within their own team, the only thing that they might be able to do would be training in a physically distance. So again, we want to keep those cohorts to one cohort. Bringing up trialists would probably cross-contaminate.
That would probably tie in with this question too, that says, what do we do with players that play multiple sports and train in a different cohort group? So,
We just answered, Stephen just answered that one.
Yeah. There's a question from Adrian for Earls saying the risk assessment tool is great, but why does it have to extend down to each team? The tool is what drives mitigation and the provincial return to play protocols, which should then simply be mandated down to the districts and in turn mandated to teams.
The tool isn't really designed for individual teams. So to a degree, Adrian's right. It is for the club, right? It's the team, it's the club that makes up, or the organization that oversees the teams. It shouldn't be for individual teams to fill out. But I think in Alberta, and it's probably not unique across the country, you have sometimes teams that are solely a part of individual leagues, not a club per se. In those situations, those teams should be filling it out individually. And I think it's important for clubs to be going through that next layer of mitigation, right? We had asked the provincial associations to create a plan. In turn, I think it's as important, if not even more important, for the clubs to be creating their own plan to deal with their individual situations on the ground. And to a degree, it's a little bit of that old saying, give a man a fish, teach a man a fish, sort of saying, right? It's easy to sort of drop plans onto people and enforce them. It's a different thing for them to kind of think through their own plans, their own realities, to address some of the mitigation that they can deal with on the ground, marry it to the mitigation that's existing in the Alberta plan. And as I said off the top of my presentation, hopefully find 2 or 3 nuggets of additional mitigation that they hadn't thought about before, that they can embed into that plan and further drive risk down.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to add anything further to this one, but I'll just read it just in case. 50 people cohort family per player. What would happen if they want to play with their team and also join their academy? Can we make sure to social distance every player so they can train with both their teams and the academy? Do you want to add anything to that, Sean? Or?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if we want to move forward and have some game type activities where we can make contact, we have to create these cohorts and stick to them. You know, we're going to have to make a decision. I mean, they should be with their team. Academy training is supplementary to sanctioned soccer in Alberta. So to stop teams from having competition when we get to stage 2 because of the sake of an academy just doesn't make sense to me. And not that I've got anything against academies. It's just, I think, you know, the kids want to get playing with their club teams and have some competition there. So yeah, they can't do both. If they want to do both, then they have physical distance in the academy.
Okay. With phase 2 starting on Friday, can we start to train our team the following day as long as social distancing and cleaning protocols are followed throughout the session?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely the social distancing training can occur this Friday if they have met all the requirements of getting the risk assessment tool, getting the feedback, got contract tracing logs in place. That you're going to, you know, look at the guidelines that we put in place and follow them. So absolutely.
Are scrimmages permitted?
Within the cohort group.
Okay. And I apologize if you covered this about kids with allergies. If they get symptoms, runny nose, cough, should they then be told to stay away until 14 days after symptoms are gone? Same with coughs related to workout weather. It's hard to monitor.
Noel, can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I think Stephen, I think it was Stephen Patrick answered that from what Dr. Hinshaw said, was basically, again, common sense. If it's an unexplained runny nose or cough, then you should be self-quarantine and you shouldn't be training, and you should be, following all the AHS rules as far as the tool and getting tested, etc. But if it's a known allergy, if it's a known cough related to your asthma, that kind of thing, there's no change, it's a stable and it's explainable, then absolutely they can train. From a liability perspective, you might choose to just have that documented with your physician, with your family doc, just again, that they're on board as well.
Can you speak to asthma? There's a few questions about that. Are those players with asthma at risk?
Well, yeah, and I saw the questions. I wasn't sure what if there was something in the document referring that, but there should be no reason someone with asthma can't train and play. It's such a broad continuum of some people have very mild asthma and well controlled. I think it's an individual decision for the player and for the family. But in regards to this virus, the virus affects everyone differently. It's very hard to predict. So I think that's an individual choice around risk mitigation. But certainly I think there's nothing in the return to train or play that would prevent someone with asthma participating.
Thank you. Jason, there's a question for you from Adrian asking if provinces can make some temporary laws of game changes in interest of safety, such as kick-ins and throw-ins.
If it's within your cohort, within your own club, and if it's intra-club scrimmage or a practice of that type of a thing, then yes. Anything between clubs, or when we go back to resuming competition, any changes to the laws of the game need to be approved by Canada Soccer.
Okay. Can I assume Team Snap or equivalent will suffice for contact tracing?
Yes, I believe you can. There's a few products out there, but Team Snap is one of them.
Okay. Can a single household have two players in different cohorts, i.e. U10 and U7, or do they have to be in the same cohort?
Yeah, no, each individual can be in a different cohort, but they should only be in one each. So it's completely fine that a U12 player is in their own cohort, and a brother or sibling is in their own cohort as well.
I think you answered how soccer phase 2 is linked to provincial phase 2.
No, it's linked to guidelines that get put forward by the provincial government that we can move on.
Okay. How does the corporate shield apply to adult soccer teams? When are they put by individual?
Can you read the last part of the question?
It says when they are put in by an individual, I guess that's what how it should read.
Well, I think there's two replies to that. The corporate shield applies no matter whether it's youth soccer or adult soccer or co-ed soccer. The corporate shield exists by being an incorporated entity, and by law, the people within the shield, directors, officers, employees, are protected by that shield from personal liability. I think the second part of that question might be related to waivers and assumption of risk documents and declarations. As I said before, it's really look at it from a contract perspective. And in order for the contract to be valid, it has to be include the parties to whom it applies to, as well as executed by the parties. So the team captain cannot sign a waiver on behalf of 12 other people. It has to be done individually by the participant.
Great. Just in case we need clarity on this still, the ASA phase 1 plan says distance to 2 meters, no heads, hand, or chest on ball, no goalkeepers. The government announcement yesterday says a cohort of 50 with distancing where possible, which our club's supposed to be following.
Right now, our plan, our return to train plan, we will obviously look to move on to the next stage where we can have cohorts, etc. But at the present time, it will be the first return to train document that will be used. So we're going to try and look at all of the information that was put out by the government yesterday and just make sure that we can make some adjustments to our document, which I don't think is going to be a big deal, and then make a decision on whether we move forward or not. But I think what people have been saying, the experts, is, don't rush this. I know people want to get on the field right away, but we have to get it right. We don't want to go backwards. So if we rush this and then we have this massive spike because of soccer, I'm sure the government are going to say to us, hey, stop, you're going back to first phase, prove that you can do it there, and then you can move on. So we're all in this together. It's not an us versus them mentality. I think everyone has to work together to make sure that soccer does the right job, make sure we do it right, and that we can move on as a group rather than trying, people going out there and just doing their own thing.
Right. And just to answer.
Sorry, can I
go ahead.
Can I just add to that a little bit, guys? Especially with how the insurance is working, we need to be making sure that we are following the document that ASA is put out. That is the approved document that we have with the agreement with our insurance company that backs Alberta Soccer through AON. Like I said earlier, if we don't follow that and there's a loss, the insurer can potentially deny it because we breached that standard of care and we didn't follow the approved guidelines that were set out and previously approved. So they might view that as a material change in risk, and we need to do our best to mitigate any type of material change in risk as well.
Okay, excellent. Sorry, Claire's just sharing with me too. I think these might be ones that I have missed. ASA document currently phase 1. When will we receive phase 2 documents?
Our intent is to get those done really quickly. I mean, we have been working long hours, obviously, at Alberta Soccer, and we'll continue to do that because we want everybody out on the pitch as well. I mean, we're advocates for the districts, the clubs, the teams, the players, the coaches. So we want to see it happen just as quickly as what you guys do. But we got to, do our due diligence and make sure that we're looking at all the guidelines and making good quality decisions on what we put in the plan.
Okay. And what is the minimum age for phase 2? I think I might have missed that one too.
Yeah, hopefully 6s.
Okay, perfect.
Under 5 and the 6s. With
Okay.
the cohort instructions.
So recommend having waivers signed before training. Is there a generic waiver available that would cover organizers?
It's in the return to train document, and I did send Word documents with all the attachments, so that can be adjusted.
Perfect. Can you please repeat the 4 pillars of the breach of standard of care? That would be for Stephen.
Yeah. The 4 pillars. So the standard of care is based on, again, 4 principles: written regulations, reasonableness, common sense, trends in the industry, and case law. Those would be the 4.
So we'll take 2 more questions, Carmen.
Okay. Just a sec here. Are clubs covered through Alberta Soccer Insurance for COVID clarification, or for COVID clarification needed?
So, sorry, Carmen, I did answer that in the chat. I'm just trying to find the exact answer I gave. Ultimately, it's a very complex question with many potential outcomes. So far, there hasn't been anything that's been claimed and paid out by any insurance company. There's nothing that's gone to court outside of one that was ultimately deemed not to be a COVID loss. So like I said last time I was speaking about following proper protocols, we have to do our best to follow the guidelines that are set out by ASA and approved by the insurance company. We don't want to jeopardize coverage for the entire association because that just kicks out any potential defense costs that would come from a claim.
Okay.
And
Just
last
looking.
question.
Why are camps limited to 10 players when training sessions can be up to 25 on a full-size pitch?
Stephen, Patrick?
Yes, sorry. So if you're referring to day camps, day camp guidance was provided early in stage 1. We didn't have any involvement or interaction with those camps. Those would apply to our camps and the like. It's a very good question as to whether or not those numbers have increased. I can take that one back to health and see if there's been any movement there.
Excellent. I'd like to thank everybody for their time this evening. We will be taking all the questions that have gone in the chat and putting together an FAQ document that will be posted on the website as well as sent to everybody on this call and to all the districts. So I truly mean this. I think we're all in this together. We all want to do the best for the kids and the players and coaches, etc. Sean Hammond, do you have anything that you would like to finish with before we sign off?
No, I'm going to keep this short. I want to really thank the three Stevens, it's like the three amigos, Steve Beeston, Steve Patrick, and Steve Indig. There was a lot of great information coming out, and yes, I think that there's a thirst for information, and you guys gave us just exactly what we were looking for. A big shout out to Earl Cochran and Jason. It's great to have you this far west, even if it's late in the evening. Thank you so much for being here and being able to answer some of those questions. And most of all, thank you to everybody on the call. And rest assured, your questions are going to be documented, and we will get back to you through the website and through emails and through your district. So thank you from Alberta Soccer to everybody that participated, but most of all to the presenters. Thank you all very much. Oh, I should not forget Dr. Grisdale. Thank you. I appreciate your input as well. Thank you.